So I just want to tell you a little story here. My talk title today is "It's All Good," and you know I've talked about this before, how much work and research I do. And after I started to read, I was so sorry I picked this title, but it was too late to go back. At least in my head, it was too late to go back. And the reason I didn't like it was I can't tell you how many articles I saw where people said, you know, that's just some new age baloney, because it's not all good, and people shouldn't be putting that out there. So I wanted to start by doing a disclaimer, I guess, okay? When I say it's all good, that doesn't mean to me that terrible things don't happen in this world. When I say it's all good, it doesn't mean to me that there aren't people in this world that are cruel and abusive, okay? I get that. You know, you don't get to be what most of our ages are here without being hurt, without having some really crummy stuff happen in your life. In fact, I was thinking about it, when I was meditating this morning, I was thinking about it. My youngest son just started a business, a lawn mowing business, and the other day he cut off the tip of one of his fingers. And we had this long conversation yesterday, and I guarantee you, nowhere in that conversation did I say, hey Scott, it's all good. You know, so I get that. And I also get that
it's all good.
I also get that what I'm going to talk about today isn't easy. And I know I don't do it all the time. I don't know anybody that does it all the time. But the benefit of walking the path is when we can do it, we can live a much more peaceful life. To me, am I doing that?
Yeah. Maybe use that maybe in the back.
No, I don't. I want to be able to move around. To me, it means releasing the labels of good and bad, so we can be open to learning from every experience that we have. That we can do what the Buddhists say: look at a situation with a beginner's eye. That we can stay in the moment. You know, in New Thought, in religious science and unity, and we don't deny the human experience. We don't deny, like I just said, that stuff happens. What we do say is that it's a human experience, and that there's a higher truth in the situation, and in that higher truth is where we find the meaning. But we have to do the work to do that. Ernest Holmes, who founded the Centers for Spiritual Living, in one of his writings, he asked the question, he said, what is it we're going to affirm? And he answered it, he said, that life is good. We're going to do this even though everything we see and touch seems to contradict the oldness of life. And I thought when I read that, I mean, I probably have read everything he's written. That is the most negative thing I've ever heard him say about, you know, when everything contradicts the oldness of life. He usually doesn't talk like that, but I think what he was trying to do is give us a reminder that even though we may not see it, that in every moment of our life there's good if we're willing to look for it, if we're willing to look for the lesson, for the experience. And for me, the process of it is when I can accept what is, when I can accept what is, even though I don't like it, I can experience peace and freedom. And that leads me to seeing more clearly, with more clarity. And when I can see with more clarity, I'm able to look at the situation and say, what is it that I need to do? And I'm able to do it in a way that's more spiritual and most effective. You know, until we're willing to accept something, we're stuck in yesterday's pain. We can't move on. We can't see the lesson. And I always think of that. I know I've talked about this before when my ex-wife and I were getting a divorce. I look back at it now, and thank God I don't know anybody that I worked with then, because that was all I could talk about. I am sure when people saw me coming, they went, "God, duck," because all I could talk about was the pain and the hurt and what she did to me. And when you do that, you're totally stuck in yesterday. You can't look forward. You win. I'm going to use this one. You can't look forward. And accepting something that's going on in our life doesn't mean that we agree with it. It's just merely acknowledging what is. It's allowing ourselves to experience what happens and allowing ourselves to feel the feelings of whatever is going on. Because when you blame and you judge, we don't experience what's going on. It's really, blaming and judging is a way of avoiding and denying. So I have a spiritual teacher a person that I have learned more about the spiritual path than probably any other 10 teachers. And that teacher wrote something about what I am speaking about today, and I thought I would read it. So this is something that Becky Fox wrote. She didn't know I was going to do this. And I really mean about her being my teacher. Acceptance of what is not judging. Knowing that spirit is in every situation. When I live in continuous expectation that God's good is coming my way, good is what I experience. When I live in a place of gratitude, my heart opens and expands to the joy of my life, and I can just accept what is, allowing the good to unfold without my ego interfering with the natural process. Having the trust and faith that Spirit's love is always here within, unquote. So what she was talking about is a way to be able to use every experience, no matter how bitter, no matter how whatever, to learn and to grow. And there are tons of examples of people that did that. Viktor Frankl was somebody who lost his entire family in Nazi concentration camp and came out and formed a whole new school of psychoanalysis that teaches people how to find meaning in life. Gandhi was somebody who had a horrible experience at a train station because of racism, and from that night on decided that he was going to find a different way of being and living. Nelson Mandela spent years and years in prison, and I just saw something this week that he said when the gates of that prison opened for him to leave, he knew unless he left that bitterness and hate behind, he would still be in prison. A lady named Immaculée Ilibaza is somebody, she's probably not, well, definitely not as famous as them, but somebody who spent a month or 2 months locked in a tiny little bathroom in Rwanda with 17 other women because a minister hid them because people were looking to kill them. And these people knew they were somewhere in the house, but they just couldn't find them. And they would stand outside the house and say, come on, Immaculée, it's time to step on a roach. Come on and face us. And I got, she was a speaker at one of our conferences, and so I volunteered to pick her up at the airport, and I got to spend 2 hours one-on-one with her in my car. And I talked to her about, she wrote a book, and the book is titled Left to Tell. And I told her that there was one particular thing, a lot of it that impressed me, but one thing, when it was all over and she was out and safe, and some people brought to her whole family was exterminated, and they brought to her the person that did it. And they said, here he is, this is the guy, he killed your mother, he killed your father, and he killed some of your brothers and sisters, and he is yours. Whatever you want to do, we're walking away. And she looked at him and said, I forgive you. And I asked her in the car, I said, how did you ever do that? And she said, how could I not do it? How could I not do it? How could I live the rest of my life in anger and bitterness? You know, we see people all the time. There's that young girl, young Afghan girl named Malala, who was shot in the head, and now she's a kid, and she's going around the world speaking for justice and education for women. And this one is not quite as profound, but anybody that's a sports fan might know who Jeremy Lin is. He's a basketball player who several years ago played for the Knicks, and he was terrific. And they talked about Linsanity, because all of New York City went nuts for him for 2 years. And then he moved to play in Houston, and he stunk. He just wasn't as good in Houston. Now he's back with the good team. He's with the Lakers. But he was interviewed in Sports Illustrated last week, and Dan Patrick said to him, tell me about the last 4 years. And he said, you know, there were lots of up and downs. He said, I had to overcome stereotypes about Asians in the NBA. And I had to overcome stereotypes about Harvard graduates in the NBA. And I had to overcome stereotypes about people that don't get drafted out of college and come in the NBA. And he said, you know, it was really challenging, but I am a much better person today than I was 4 years ago. You know, the message is that we need to embrace all of life. The pleasure and the pain, the joy and the grief, the good and the bad that I just said ignore. We can choose. We can choose how we see things. We can call forth the good. We have the strength and the power to do that, to call forth the good in any situation. And when we do, we're aligning ourselves with a higher power. You know, in the book, The New Earth, Eckhart Tolle talks about Krishnamurti, who was a spiritual teacher years ago. And he said when Krishnamurti was coming to the end of his career, when he was older, he had an audience one day. He was giving a talk. And he said to the audience, you want to know my secret? Want to know my secret? And of course, everybody perked up because everybody wanted to know his secret. And he said, here it is. I don't mind what happens. I don't mind what happens. And then he went on. He never explained what he meant. So in The New Earth, Tolle takes a shot at it. And Tolle says what it means to him, he said, it implies that internally I am in alignment with whatever happens. I'm not resistant to what happens. I'm not going to mentally label something good or bad. And he said that doesn't mean that we don't want to make changes in our life. He said, but when the basis of your actions, the basis of what you're going to do is an inner alignment with what's going on in the present moment, he said your actions become empowered by the intelligence of life itself. So he was saying when you can act from a sense that I talked about before of peace and freedom, you gain more clarity. And when you do that, all of life comes, we might call it spirit or God. He called it the intelligence of life itself comes to work with us. And he went on to say, Tolle, that there are so many of us that believe that our happiness depends on what happens to us. He said, we become dependent on form. And in religious science, we would say, rather than form, we would say effect, that we become dependent on the effects of life. But what happens is the form or the effects, whatever, they change. And because of that, if that's what we depend on, we miss the deeper perfection that's inherent in all of life itself, a perfection that's always there. And it lies beyond what's happening in the moment or what's not happening in the moment. He wrote, Tolle, accept the present moment and find the perfection that is deeper than any form So, for me, he's saying when we do that, we find the lesson, we find the bigger picture in whatever is happening. Khalil Gibran, I love this. Khalil Gibran said, "I've learned silence from the talkative, toleration from the intolerant, kindness from the unkind, yet strange, I am ungrateful to these teachers." It's another way of saying that even when we're going through difficult times, they're a gift in some respects. They're a gift because of what they can teach us. So I want to do another sports story. A while back, I talked about Roger Bannister. And Roger Bannister, for those of you that don't know, is the first person to ever run a sub 4-minute mile. He did that in 1954, and it was a big feat because there were a lot of medical people that thought that the body couldn't do it, that you'd literally explode if you tried to run fast enough to do a sub 4-minute mile. This week, I found out that there's a whole backstory to that I never knew, and here's what it is. That Roger Bannister, he did 54, he did the mile. In 1952, he represented Great Britain in the Helsinki Olympics. And he was a huge favorite to win the event that he was in. He was a huge favorite to win the gold medal. And he didn't. He didn't win the gold. And that was what motivated him to hang around and see if he could run a sub 4-minute mile. 30 years later, they were doing a tribute to what he had done. And he got up before the audience and he said, his plan was, if I had won the gold medal, I was going to retire from running and pursue a medical career. So imagine that if he had won, if he hadn't had that disappointment, number one, he wouldn't have been the first person to break the mile, to break the 4-minute barrier. And who knows when it would have happened, if it would have. Once it happened, within weeks, other people were doing it. It was a mental set. But if he hadn't had that disappointment, definitely he wouldn't have been the guy to do it. And what he said to the crowd, he said, "My failure made me look for one more challenge." Eric Butterworth said that Jesus says, "Judge not according to appearances, but judge righteous judgment." And he gives, I think, a really, really nice, wonderful, fun example. He said, somebody comes to you and they give you an acorn. And they said, right here, they put it in your hand, they say, "In this acorn is an oak tree." And you look and you see an acorn. So you cut it open and look, and then you can even go do chemical tests on it, but there isn't an oak tree. And he says, our perception tells us an acorn is an acorn. But the reality of it is, if you plant it and you take care of it, you'll get to see an oak tree. And the point is that we can look beyond appearances, that there's something deeper, that things may happen to us, but what really matters is what happens in us. That we, you and I, all of us, can control our thoughts. And we can take responsibility for our life. We can see, when we see things, any of us, when we see things not necessarily as they are. We see things as we are. And so if we have an experience that we want to change, rather than changing the experience, we can look at changing ourselves, look at changing our perception, look at changing where we are. Anthony DeMillo is a priest who's written a lot of books, and in some of them he does stories and vignettes, and in one of them he has a vignette about a student who goes to his teacher and says, "Why is everyone happy except me?" And the teacher says, "Because they learn to see goodness and beauty everywhere." And the student says, "Why don't I see goodness and beauty everywhere?" And the teacher says, "Because you can't see outside of you what you don't see inside of you." And for me, when I think of that, I think, part of the beauty of who we are is our spiritual nature, the God within, the power that we have the strength, the connection that we will have. You know, we teach that God is omnipresent, which means all of God. It's a hard concept to get, but all of God is everywhere at once, everywhere and in everything. So any situation that we're in, any situation, all of God is right there with us, and we just need to look to find that God. Something else Holmes wrote, he said, only as we give the best to every passing experience can we enter into the joys of living. So I want to tell you a story. Oh, I keep forgetting. I want to tell you a story about two people that was in Sports Illustrated this week. And actually, I had skipped the article, and Becky said, you got to read this article. And it's a story about a guy named Dave and a woman named Shirley. Dave is somewhere in his 40s, and Shirley is, I think, 54, married, a mother, and a grandmother. And Shirley is not a risk taker. Shirley kind of lives in her life, you know, her box. And her husband's kind of a risk taker, and so are her sons. And one of her sons was turning 30. And the year before her other son turned 30, it did a parachute jump. So the other guy thought he had to do it, but his brother was away. And for some reason, he calls up Shirley, his mom, and said, will you do the jump? And to this day, she can't figure out why she said yes, but she did. Dave is in his 40s, divorced, given up on having children, and he lived pretty much for himself. There were three things Dave valued in life: skydiving, partying, and chasing women. And I thought, you know, if you took the skydiving out, anyway. So they do this jump. He became a teacher, and they meet, and they do the jump, which is, he's done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's her first. The chute doesn't open, and he does everything he knows how to do to open it and to open the reserve chute. And he can't reach the handle on the reserve chute. But he manages to do enough to slow it down somewhat, to slow their descent. Not as slow as it needs to be, but he did manage to slow it down. And then before they were going to hit, he turns to her and he yells at her, put your knees up and turn this way. And when she does, he slides underneath her. And he makes sure he hits first. And he protects her. And they hit. And in the article it said they hit so hard, people a quarter of a mile away heard the impact. Could you imagine that? And they were both severely injured. Today, Shirley is 100% fine. Dave is a quadriplegic. And when people come and ask him, would you do it again? He goes, yep, without any hesitation. He's never ever, he didn't pack his own chute that day. He's never gone to find out who packed it, because he said, that would just make him feel horrible. It wouldn't change who I am, and why would I go to blame? And what really touched me, I want to read a paragraph from the story to you. This was what the writer wrote about Dave. He said, it was, in a strange way, a rare opportunity Dave received. How many of us have a chance to be tested like that? Perhaps we think we couldn't do what Dave did, that we haven't been heroic enough in our lives. But who says you need to have lived a hero's life to be a hero? Why can't a hero be just a normal, flawed human being, a guy who likes hot wings, cold beer, and chasing girls? Maybe that is the gift Dave gives the rest of us, the assurance that in that moment, we might be able to do what he did. here's a guy, certainly, it wasn't his finest moment the finest moment of his life, but it was his finest moment. He was able to reach deep within him and find something, and he told the writer, he said, what I was concerned about is keeping my students safe. Now, this is a guy who chased women and drank every day, you know, but he found, he was able to go within and to find some higher purpose. If he could do that, couldn't any one of us do that? Be able to look at any experience that we're facing and see it in a more God-filled, higher light. So I just want to close. This was, somebody put, one of my friends who I don't remember who did it, put this on Facebook. It's a kind of a piece of wisdom from Greg Braden. And the title of it is, Make the Ordinary Come Alive. And he said, do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a great week.